The sounds came through the concrete. That was the thing the family in the parking garage had not anticipated. That the sounds would be physical. They had assumed noise. What they got was vibration. Each impact somewhere above them arrived not through the air, but through the structure itself, traveling down the support columns and through the floor and into the soles of their feet, and up through their legs into their chests. The 7-year-old boy had stopped trying to cover his ears 20 minutes ago because covering your ears did nothing when the sound was coming from the ground. The mother was keeping count. She did not know why. Something in her needed the impacts to be finite, to be countable, to be a number rather than a condition. She had lost count at 60-something. That was 40 minutes ago. Her husband was at the ramp, not at the top of it. He was not going to the top of it, but midway up, at the angle where he could see a strip of daylight without being visible from the street. He had been there for an hour. He had come back twice to tell them what he saw. After the second time he stopped coming back, and she understood that what he was seeing had moved past the point where reporting it was useful. The girl pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and said she wanted to go home. Her mother said soon. She said it with the specific steadiness of someone who understood that the word had stopped meaning what it meant, and had become a sound instead, a particular arrangement of phonemes that communicated, I am here, I am still here, we are still here without requiring its dictionary definition to be true. Above them, something hit the street with enough force to crack the ceiling of the parking structure in 3 places. Dust came down in thin curtains. The boy made a sound that was not quite a word. The mother said, soon again. From altitude, the city was a map of what had already happened. The fires were the most visible. 4 separate columns of black smoke rising from different quadrants, merging at about 2,000 feet into a general haze that turned the late morning light amber. Below the smoke, the geometry of the city had been altered in ways that took a moment to process because the brain kept trying to impose the familiar grid over what it was seeing, and the familiar grid no longer fit. Entire blocks had been restructured by the fighting, not destroyed in the uniform way that fires or earthquakes destroyed things, restructured, reshaped by impacts that came from specific directions at specific speeds and expressed their opinions about load-bearing walls and structural integrity in the vocabulary of physics rather than architecture. A skyscraper that had been 40 stories that morning was now 23 stories, the upper portion rearranged across a 4-block radius. The elevated expressway had a gap in it 300 feet wide where something had gone through it, rather than over it. 3 of the figures were working through the Guardians. War Woman was still up. This was remarkable and would have been more remarkable if there had been anyone left to remark on it. She had been fighting for 6 hours. Her armor had taken damage on most surfaces. She was keeping 2 of the figures occupied through the specific mechanism of refusing to be finished, which was taxing for all parties. The 2 figures hit her at intervals. She hit back. The exchange rate was catastrophically unfavorable. She kept going. 2 more figures had established what appeared to be a continuing interest in military hardware. The convoy they had found on the expressway had been fully processed. The vehicles were spread across a half-mile of road surface in forms that were no longer recognizable as vehicles. The soldiers had stopped firing when it became clear that firing was not connected to any outcome they could influence. Now they were doing what people do when they have run out of options that relate to their training. They were trying to help civilians. It was not an efficient use of their capabilities, but it was something. 4 figures were in the loop, and the loop was where most of the noise was coming from. Because the loop had the densest concentration of tall structures, and the densest concentration of tall structures provided the most opportunities for the particular kind of creativity that 4 figures with unlimited strength and no architectural sentimentality could express. The remaining 7 were distributed: north, south, suburbs. The emergency broadcast system was transmitting. Nobody who could hear it was in a position to follow its instructions, because its instructions assumed a category of emergency that had a direction to move away from, and this emergency was not that kind. In a bunker that did not appear on any map accessible to the public, Cecil Stedman was looking at 17 screens. 16 showed combat feeds. The 17th was the one that had appeared 40 seconds ago, tagged priority. Unclassified contact in the top right corner in the specific shade of red that his system reserved for things it had not seen before and was not certain how to categorize. He was looking at it with the stillness of a man who had spent 30 years learning to read bad news quickly, and had just received some. "Get me every available satellite on that contact," he said. "Right now." His voice was even. It was always even. The evenness was not calm. It was the professional substitute for calm, which was a different thing. Tell me I'm wrong about what that is. Reyes, his lead analyst, had been awake for 19 hours. She pulled the satellite data. She looked at what it showed her. She looked at Cecil. She did not tell him he was wrong. Viltrumite class signature, she said. Single contact, upper atmosphere, and descending at. She stopped. She looked at the number again. Sir, the velocity is above anything in our catalog. Above Omni-Man's recorded atmospheric entry data by a significant margin. A bright point, moving, decelerating now but still moving fast. Trajectory. Downtown Chicago. Grid 7. Direct center of the active engagement zone. She paused. Sir, if that's another one of... It's not, Cecil said. She stopped. The signature is different. The mass reading is different. He kept looking at the screen. Whatever this is, it didn't come through a portal. It came from space. He picked up the secondary comm with his left hand. Pull every evacuation asset from Grid 7. Anything moving through that grid. Redirect it underground and out. Do it now. Into the comm. Find me Grayson. Tell him what we're tracking. The bright point continued to descend. Mark was in the air over the north side when the comm crackled with the alert. He had been awake for 9 hours and fighting for 6 of them. His left arm had been wrenched badly in the engagement over Logan Square. One of the evil Marks had gotten inside his guard and applied leverage that the arm's engineering had not been designed to accommodate. It worked. It hurt in a way that was constant and specific, and which he had assigned to a compartment in his awareness that he was keeping closed, because opening it would mean acknowledging what was in it. And acknowledging what was in it would cost him something he couldn't afford to spend. He had stopped counting how many of them he had fought. The number wasn't useful. What was useful was the next one, and the one after that, and the question of whether the next one was going to be the one where his body finally submitted a formal objection that he couldn't override. The comm message was from one of Cecil's operators. 7 seconds of audio. New contact. Viltrumite class. Grid 7. Mark looked south, toward the downtown smoke. He could see the figures from here if he knew where to look, which he did. He could distinguish their movement from the thermal distortion over the fires, the specific quality of Viltrumite's speed motion, the way it registered as a blurring at the edges of shapes that were moving faster than shapes should move. He could not see the new contact yet. Then he heard it, not the sound of it, not immediately. The first indication was the absence of sound, which was strange and brief, but real. A fraction of a second where the ambient noise of the battle seemed to contract, to pull back from a point above the downtown engagement zone, as though the air was preparing for something. Then, the entry sound arrived. It built from nothing to overwhelming in under 2 seconds. Not an explosion, but the concentrated pressure wave of something very large, decelerating very hard, from very fast. The frequency of it was below comfortable hearing range. Mark felt it as much as heard it, felt it in his chest cavity and the structure of his teeth, felt it as a general statement from the atmosphere about the laws of physics being negotiated at significant scale somewhere to his south. The impact came next. He saw the dust cloud from 3 miles away, a white-gray ring expanding outward from a point in what had been a plaza on Michigan Avenue, moving fast and then losing momentum and then settling, leaving behind a changed landscape and a ringing quality to the air that persisted for several seconds. Mark was already moving toward it. He arrived to find a body on the pavement. One of the evil Marks, a variant he recognized by the armor he'd been wearing, a warlord type who had been working the southern engagements for the past 2 hours. The armor was no longer intact. The body was no longer a useful shape. Standing over it was a figure that did not fit any category Mark had developed over the past 6 hours. Enormous. That was the first word his brain supplied, and it was accurate but insufficient. The size was the first thing but not the most significant thing. The most significant thing was the stillness. Mark had been fighting Viltrumite hybrid opponents all morning, and they were never still. They were always in motion or preparing for motion or recovering from motion. This figure was standing in the center of a ruined plaza, in the complete stillness of something that had no reason to be anything other than still. That stillness communicated more than the size did. White hair, white beard, a cybernetic left arm that caught the amber light through the smoke and gave it back as something harder. Armor that looked like it had been through things that would have been historically significant if there had been anyone left to write the history. Mark pulled up. He hovered. He looked at the body, then at the figure. He had a lot of questions. He assembled them and selected the most fundamental. "What are you?" he said. The figure turned, looked at him. The look had a quality that Mark had felt before. From his father, at the worst moment, when Nolan had looked at him across a ruined stretch of countryside, and the look had said, "I can end this conversation whenever I choose." This look had that quality, but it was not personal. It was categorical. It was the look of something assessing a type, not an individual. "And there's the original," the figure said. His voice was deep and even and completely unbothered, smaller than I expected. 30 yards away, an evil Mark who had been in the process of doing something to a building facade had stopped. He was looking at the body on the ground. He was looking at the figure. He was doing math, and the math was not producing results he found comfortable. Across the plaza, 2 more had gone still. A 4th had descended from the air and was hovering at the edge of the scene, close enough to see clearly, far enough to have the option of not being involved in what happened next. The figure looked at each of them in turn. Then he looked at his hands, right hand, then cybernetic left, with the brief attentiveness of someone confirming that their tools are in order before beginning work. He looked up. "Come at me if you need proof," he said. The evil Mark closest to him looked at the body on the ground, looked at the figure, did not move. The figure waited. He was smiling now. It was not a large smile. It was the private, internal smile of someone whose working day had just revealed something worth showing up for. Nobody moved for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is not a long time. In a conversation, 3 seconds is a pause. In a fistfight between normal humans, 3 seconds is enough time for several complete exchanges. In a fight between Viltrumite class opponents, 3 seconds is an eternity. It is the span in which positions are read, distances are measured, trajectories are calculated, and recalculated. 3 seconds of stillness between beings who can cross a city block before a human eye can register the movement is not a rest, it is a negotiation. The evil Mark closest to Conquest, the warlord type heavyset for a version of Mark, carrying the specific density of someone who had been fighting things that could fight back for most of his adult life, ended the negotiation. He did not charge the way the dead one had charged. He had watched the dead one charge. What he did instead was close the distance in 3 stages. A burst that covered the first 20 feet, a brief airborne adjustment that changed his angle, and a final committed drive from 8 feet out that came in low, targeting Conquest's center of mass with the goal of taking the big man off his feet rather than through his chest. It was, Mark would think later, the correct approach. It was what he would have tried. Conquest's response was to move 3 feet to his left. That was all. 3 feet timed with the same economy that he had demonstrated with the first one. Not reactive, not a scramble, a pre-positioned relocation to a spot he had already selected before the evil Mark began moving. The evil Mark's drive took him through the space where Conquest's center of mass had been, and continued through that space for another 6 feet before the evil Mark could arrest his own momentum. In the half-second of the evil Mark's overextension, Conquest hit him. Once. A single descending strike with the cybernetic left arm, directed at the base of the evil Mark's neck where it met the shoulder, delivered with the full weight of Conquest's upper body behind it. The sound it produced was not the sound of a punch. It was the sound of a support column failing, a single dense crack that had nothing musical about it. The evil Mark went into the pavement at an angle and did not immediately demonstrate interest in coming out of it. Conquest stepped back. He looked at the result. He looked at the remaining 3 who were watching. 2, he said. "I'm counting." Mark had repositioned during the exchange. He was lower now, closer to street level, using the corner of a structure that had mostly survived as a reference point. He was not hiding. Hiding was not a useful concept against opponents who could hear his heartbeat and see through the dust. He was establishing geometry, understanding where things were relative to where other things were. He was watching Conquest the way he had learned, over 6 months of being invincible, to watch the things that were going to be the real problem. The evil Marks were the real problem. 16 of them spread across a city, and he was one person. That was the math that had been crushing him for 6 hours. The math had just acquired a new variable, and the new variable was producing results he could not immediately classify as good or bad. Conquest had killed 2 evil Marks. One was definitely dead. The first one, the impaled one, was beyond debate. The second was down but ambiguous. Either way, Conquest was reducing the number of evil marks on this battlefield. Conquest was also, very clearly, doing it for reasons that had nothing to do with Earth's continued habitability. He was doing it the way a man plays a game he enjoys. That was the distinction Mark kept returning to. The evil marks fought with varying qualities of calculation and rage and mission focus. Conquest fought the way someone fights when the fighting is the point. Not the damage, not the strategic outcome, not the message being sent. The act itself, the specific pleasure of an organism doing the thing it was built for. That was the part that should have been reassuring, and wasn't. Cecil's voice came through his comm. "Mark, I need a read on the new contact. What are we looking at?" "Big," Mark said. "Old. He killed 2 of the alternates in about 30 seconds. A pause. Killed or incapacitated. Mark looked at the second one, still face down in the pavement. 1 definite. 1 pending. Another pause. Cecil, he's Viltrumite. Full. Not a hybrid." The silence on Cecil's end lasted longer than Mark would have preferred. "His designation is Conquest," Cecil said finally. The name came out carefully, the way you say the name of something you have been hoping would remain theoretical. "He's in our files. Viltrumite warrior, one of the oldest active ones we have data on. The records are incomplete, but what's there isn't good." Another pause. "Mark, do not engage him directly." "I know. I'm serious." "Do not. Cecil, I know." Mark ended the transmission. The evil Mark warlord had not moved. He was still at the edge of the scene, the 4th one, the one who had descended to watch rather than engage. He was the variant Mark had been most careful about for the past 4 hours, the one whose behavior pattern was consistently more calculated than the others. Where most of the evil Marks operated on a spectrum between impulse and moderate strategy, this one operated on a spectrum between strategy and strategy. He watched the second evil Mark go down into the pavement, and he was very still. He was doing the same math Mark was doing. He was arriving at some of the same conclusions, and some different ones. The approaching evil Mark, the one who had been in the air, tracking something, who had been drawn to the scene by the sounds of the first 2 engagements, landed 20 feet from Conquest. He was younger looking than most of the variants, angrier. His timeline had done something to him early, and the something had never stopped doing it. He looked at the 2 downed Marks. He looked at Conquest. "What is this?" he said. "This is a demonstration," Conquest said. He was not looking at the angry one. He was still looking at the warlord, at the edge of the scene. "You're welcome to be part of it." The angry Mark charged. It was faster than the previous 2 had been. Genuinely fast, legitimately threatening speed, the kind of speed that Mark himself could not fully track with his eye. The angry Mark had a technique behind it too, not just velocity. He came in with his shoulder dropped to protect his center line and his arms positioned to allow for a grab on contact. Conquest caught him by the forearm. Not a block, a catch. His cybernetic hand closed around the forearm at the apex of the charge, and the catch arrested the motion completely. Not gradually, not through give and take. Completely. The angry Mark's body continued moving forward while his arm did not, and the consequences of that discontinuity expressed themselves in the shoulder joint and the elbow simultaneously. The sound was different from the previous 2, more specific, more biological. The angry Mark did not go down. He was Viltrumite enough that the damage to the arm and shoulder, while severe, was not immediately incapacitating. He twisted, tried to use the compromised arm to create leverage, tried to bring his free hand around. Conquest drove his forehead into the angry Mark's nose. The nose rearranged. The angry Mark's legs stopped being interested in their job. He sat down in the rubble and stayed there, attempting to process several competing inputs. 3 engagements, 3 results. The entire sequence had taken 40 seconds. Conquest turned to the remaining watchers. The warlord, one other who had drifted in from a block away, drawn by the sounds of the first engagements. Mark at the corner. He looked at each of them. The survey was unhurried. He was not checking for threats. He had made a determination about the threat level of everyone present, and was now simply noting positions. He looked at the dead one on the ground. The first one. He walked over to it and looked down at it. "Half Viltrumite," he said. Again to himself the internal narration of a professional processing material. He crouched. An unexpected gesture, bringing himself to one knee in the rubble to look more closely at the body. He examined the face, the build, half something soft. He stood, and all wasted. He said it without contempt in the conventional sense. Contempt implies an emotional response to something that has disappointed you. This was more detached than that. It was the observation of someone assessing a product that had failed to meet its potential through flaws in the manufacturing process. The waste was not personal, it was systemic. Mark said, "You came here to evaluate us." Conquest looked at him. "I came here to evaluate this planet's progress." I was not expecting. He gestured at the general landscape of the engagement zone. This. What were you expecting? A managed transition, minimal resistance, a population in the appropriate stage of compliance. He looked at the burning skyline. What I found instead is considerably more interesting. He looked back at Mark. "You're the primary asset, the one with the assignment. I don't have an assignment. Your father did. His genetics are yours. The assignment transfers." He said it with complete factual neutrality, the way you cite a policy you have no particular feeling about, because it has always existed and has never been questioned. Whether you understand that yet is not my concern. And them? Mark meant the evil marks. Conquest looked at the 3 downed variants, and at the warlord still watching from the edge, and at the other one who had come in from the block away. "Failures," he said. "Half your people's blood, spent on timelines that produced nothing worth reporting. They've made a mess of an assignment that should have been straightforward." He looked at Mark directly. "You're the original. You have more of what matters than any of them." "I'm not going to subjugate Earth," Mark said. "Not today," Conquest agreed, with the patience of someone who has had this conversation before and understands that the initial refusal is a stage in a process rather than a conclusion. "Today there are more immediate concerns." He turned back to the battlefield, to the warlord, who had still not moved, to the sounds of the remaining evil marks doing damage across the city. He cracked his knuckles, the organic right hand, the 4 fingers and thumb of something that had been doing this longer than most civilizations, and the sound of it was ordinary in a way that made it worse. "Come at me if you need proof," he said, to the warlord specifically this time. "Or don't. Either way, I have work to do." But he was looking at Conquest with an expression that Mark recognized, because he had felt it himself once before, in a stretch of destroyed forest, with his father standing across from him. It was the expression of someone running every scenario available to them, and finding that none of the scenarios ended the way they needed to end. The expression of someone who was starting to understand the actual size of the problem. Conquest did not wait for the warlord to decide. He turned away from the watching figures and flew north, low and fast, toward the densest cluster of ongoing violence. The 4 figures in the loop who had been restructuring downtown Chicago's skyline for the past several hours. He did not announce this. He did not invite participation. He went the way a tide goes, because going was what he did, and the direction was simply wherever the next thing was. The warlord watched him go. Then the warlord looked at Mark. The look lasted 2 seconds and communicated several things without committing to any of them. Then he was airborne, moving east, returning to whatever he had been doing before Conquest arrived. Mark stayed where he was for a moment. He had 3 separate engagements he needed to get back to. He had an arm that was going to keep filing complaints. He had Cecil in his ear, and Eve on his comm, and a city full of people in parking garages, and collapsed hotel lobbies, and anywhere else they had managed to get to in the 6 hours since this started. He looked at the 2 downed evil marks in the plaza. The angry one was conscious, sitting in the rubble, cradling his arm with a quality of focus that suggested he was somewhere between rage and shock. The other one was still face down. Mark made a decision. He went north, following Conquest at a distance. Not with him. Behind him. That was a distinction that felt important to maintain. The 4 loop figures had been operating as a loose collective for most of the morning. They were not coordinated in any structured sense. There was no chain of command, no tactical communication, no shared objective beyond the general mandate of destruction that Angstrom Levy had provided when he opened the portals. But they had fallen into a functional rhythm by proximity. When one of them demolished something, the debris created opportunities for the others. When a military response organized itself around one figure, the other 3 had freedom of movement until that response collapsed. It was cooperation without communication, the emergent behavior of 4 individuals who happened to be operating in the same space with the same general appetites. This arrangement had a structural weakness that none of the 4 had needed to think about until this moment, which was that it depended on no new variable entering the system. Conquest entered the system. He came in from the south at speed, and the four figures became aware of him at different moments and in different ways. The one closest to his approach vector became aware of him first, when the displaced air from his approach hit her, and she turned. And then Conquest arrived. He hit her with his shoulder at full speed. She was a variant of Mark who had been shaped by a timeline that made her large and dense, even by the standards of Viltrumite hybrids. She had absorbed more of the genetic potential than most of the others, and she had been one of the most dangerous figures on the battlefield for the past 6 hours. She had brought down 2 of the Guardians personally. The impact sent her through the lower 15 floors of a structure that had already lost its upper half. She came out the other side, through the exterior wall, and continued through a second building's lobby before the physics finished their argument with her momentum. She was alive. She would be functional again eventually. Conquest did not check. He was already turning to the next one. From 2 blocks away, Mark watched the opening exchange and made himself keep watching instead of engaging. Not because he didn't want to engage, because he needed to understand what he was looking at before he made any decisions that couldn't be unmade. Conquest against a single evil Mark was the 40-second sequence he had already witnessed. The clinical elimination of a significant threat by something that existed at a categorically different level. What he needed to understand was Conquest against multiple opponents simultaneously, because that was the scenario that was relevant to his actual situation. The remaining 3 loop figures engaged at once. Not coordinated. It happened simultaneously because they each independently arrived at the same conclusion, that a simultaneous engagement was better than a sequential one, not because anyone told them. The one to Conquest's left went for his arm. The one directly behind went for the back of his knees. The third came in overhead, using gravity as an addition to whatever she could generate on her own. Conquest tracked all 3. He caught the one going for his arm and used her as a redirected object, swinging her by the wrist into the path of the one coming from behind, converting her from an attacker into an obstacle. The one from behind ran into his diverted ally at full speed, and both went down in a tangle of limbs and rubble. The overhead one landed on his back. This one he let land, he let her get both arms around his shoulders. Let her try to establish the hold she was going for, and then he simply sat down, dropped his full mass straight down to the pavement in a controlled fall that transferred the entire force of the landing through his back and through her and into the ground. The pavement cracked. She lost the hold. He was back up before she finished processing what had happened. 3 seconds. 3 opponents addressed. The 2 who had collided were extracting themselves from the rubble. The one who had taken the back fall was trying to re-establish her position. Conquest hit the closest of the extracting pair before he was fully upright, and that engagement ended there. 4 down from the loop group. 3 in the plaza from before. Mark was keeping count the way his mother had been keeping count in the parking garage 2 blocks south. He was doing it for the same reason, needing the impacts to be a number rather than a condition. Eve's voice came through the comm, tight with effort. "Mark, I have a problem on Wabash." "What kind?" "The building above the tunnel is settling faster than I can compensate. I need..." A pause that was not a pause but a moment of concentration, of redirecting attention to the thing that was currently demanding more than she had available. "I need 5 minutes where nobody adds more structural load to this block. I can't guarantee that." "I know you can't guarantee it. I'm telling you anyway." Another pause. "There are 40 people in this tunnel, Mark." "I know. I'm coming." He turned from the loop engagement and went south, and he passed over the plaza on his way and saw that the warlord had returned. Not to engage Conquest. That was the notable thing. The warlord was standing at the edge of the loop engagement zone, watching. The same quality of attention that Mark had been applying, from a different angle. The warlord had come back to watch Conquest, and the expression on his face as he watched was the expression Mark had seen in the mirrors of his life when he thought about the things he couldn't fix. The tunnel on Wabash was a matter manipulation masterwork that was also visibly struggling. Eve had compressed and reformed debris from a collapsed hotel lobby into a navigable passage, ceiling and walls and floor held in coherence by her concentration. The ceiling had a crack running its length that had not been there 20 minutes ago. The crack was growing. The building above it was continuing to have its own opinions about load distribution, and those opinions were incompatible with 40 people's continued survival. Mark found her at the tunnel entrance. She was standing with her hands at her sides and her eyes closed, and her face carrying the expression of someone lifting something very heavy by an act of will rather than physics. She looked like she had aged since the last time he saw her, which had been 3 hours ago. "I've got it," she said, without opening her eyes. For now. Maybe 10 more minutes if nothing changes. Nothing's going to change on this block, Mark said. He made it as close to a promise as he could without making it a promise. The big one, she said. The one you didn't call an evil, Mark, when you chemmed Cecil. What is it? Viltrumite. Full one. Old. He looked at the crack in the tunnel ceiling. He's killing them. Her eyes opened. The alternates. 4 in the loop just now. 3 before that. He looked at her. He's not doing it for us. She held his gaze. Her hands were still at her sides, and the tunnel was still holding, and she was still sustaining both simultaneously. Is that the same as it being bad? Mark didn't answer that. He went back to the air. Angstrom Levy was on the roof of a building 6 blocks from the loop. He had chosen this position for the sightlines. He could see 4 of the ongoing engagements from here, could monitor the general shape of the battlefield, could communicate with the evil marks through the comm devices they all carried, from when this had been a plan rather than a situation. His plan was not what it had been when he opened the portals. When he opened the portals, the plan had been precise. Multiple alternates deployed simultaneously, heroes overwhelmed, Mark Grayson discredited and isolated, Earth's defenses dismantled, in a controlled sequence that left Levy in a position of leverage. He had accounted for Cecil's monitoring capabilities. He had accounted for the Guardian's response capacity. He had accounted for Mark's physical and psychological limits. He had not accounted for Conquest. He was watching the comm device in his hand. He had been trying to reach the evil marks in the loop for 8 minutes. The loop evil marks were not responding, and the reason they were not responding was available in the sounds coming from the north. 6 blocks away, through the amber haze, he could see a shape moving through what remained of the loop engagement zone. Large, white-haired, moving with a quality of unhurried thoroughness that communicated even at distance that the thoroughness was not going to stop before it was finished. Levy was breathing faster than he wanted to be. He looked at the portal device on his wrist. He could open an exit. He could open exits for the alternates who were still functional, pull them back through, regroup, replan. The portal network was intact. He had access to dozens of anchor points. He needed to concentrate to open a portal. Concentration required calm. He looked at the shape moving through the loop, and he was having trouble with calm. He pressed his calm again. Anyone, report in. I need a status on. The warlord's voice came through, flat. 6 of us, still functional. 3 down in the plaza, 4 down in the loop, 2 down elsewhere. Levy processed this. The new arrival. Can we? No, the warlord said. If we coordinated not today, not with what's available. A pause. Get us out if you're going to get us out. Do it now, before he finishes the loop. Levy looked at the portal device. He focused. He tried to calm his breathing. From the north, something impacted something else, and the sound of it rolled across 6 city blocks and hit Levy in the chest like a hand. He kept trying to focus. In the loop, Conquest stood among what remained of the afternoon's engagement. His armor had taken some damage, a score across the right side where one of the evil marks had connected before going down, a fracture in the plating over his left shoulder. His face was unmarked. His breathing was the breathing of a man who had taken a moderately brisk walk. He looked around at what was left. He looked at Mark, who had returned from the south and was hovering at the edge of the engagement zone. He looked at the warlord, still watching. He looked at the smoke columns and the amber sky and the general devastation of a city that had been beautiful that morning. 4, he said. He was counting 2. 7 total. The math improves. Then 4 evil marks dropped out of the sky. The warlord had not been watching alone. He had been watching and communicating, and the communication had produced a response, the 4 most functional remaining alternates, coming in from multiple vectors, converging on Conquest's position from the north, south, east, and west simultaneously. Not elegant, not precisely coordinated, but simultaneous, and from 4 directions at once. The first hit rocked Conquest sideways. A genuine impact, real force, real response in Conquest's body. The second arrived before he finished absorbing the first, coming from the south, adding to the existing vector. The third hit him from behind. For one moment, Conquest had both feet off the ground. For one moment, he was moving in a direction he had not chosen. He landed, hard, in the rubble. He was up before the dust finished rising, but he had been down. That had happened. That was information. He stood in the small crater his landing had made and looked at the four figures surrounding him. He laughed. It was not performed. It was not theatrical. It was the quiet, private laugh of a man who has been handed something he did not expect, and found it genuinely satisfying. Levy opened the portal device's interface and tried to breathe. The device was Levy's own engineering, not a physical object in the conventional sense, but a concentration aid, something to anchor his focus on the dimensional mathematics that his modified brain could access and his original brain could not have conceived of. He had absorbed the knowledge of thousands of alternate selves over years of painful, cumulative integration. The knowledge was there. Accessing it required stillness. He could hear the fight from 6 blocks away. The sounds from the loop had changed quality in the last 4 minutes. The earlier sounds had been the sounds of figures doing damage to a city, varied, distributed, the acoustic signature of multiple individual operations conducted across a wide area. The sounds now were concentrated. They came from one location, and they had a rhythm to them that was different from the earlier chaos. A rhythm implied one entity setting the tempo. Levy pressed his palms flat on the roof surface. He closed his eyes. The dimensional mathematics were available to him. He could feel the anchor points, the resonance signatures of the alternate realities he had mapped, the specific frequencies that corresponded to the timelines from which the evil marks had been drawn. He could feel which of those frequencies were still viable, still accessible, still connected to a reality that had a landing point intact. He needed 30 seconds of concentration to open a portal wide enough to pull multiple people through. He needed to not be listening to the sounds from the north. He pressed his palms harder against the rooftop and worked on the mathematics and was doing well, genuinely making progress toward the calm he needed, when his comm device produced the warlord's voice again. "He's through all 4, the warlord said. "The coordinated group. All 4 are down." Levy's concentration dissolved. He opened his eyes. He looked north, across the 6 blocks of amber haze and smoke, toward the loop. The shape was still moving, still the same quality of thoroughness. Levy stood up. He was not a physical person. He was a brain. A modified, expanded, sometimes monstrous brain that had been built for processing and planning and the specific kind of intelligence that understood systems. He understood what he was looking at as a system. He understood that the system had acquired a variable that he had not modeled, and that unmodeled variables in complex systems did not stay confined to their initial impact zone. They propagated. They changed the conditions for every other variable in the system. He understood that his plan was not recoverable in its current form. The portal. Get the remaining alternates out. Regroup. Reconstruct a version of the plan that accounted for the new variable. This was rational. This was the correct response to a failed operation. Cut losses, preserve assets, rebuild. He pressed his palms back to the roof. He closed his eyes. He found the mathematics again, slower this time, the approach more deliberate. The anchor points were there. He began to assemble the first portal's geometry, the specific dimensional address of the warlord's origin timeline, which had a stable landing point in a location that would allow reorganization. 30 seconds. He just needed 30 seconds. He was at 22 when the roof access door behind him opened. Not a person through it. Conquest through it. Conquest had not come from the access door in any meaningful sense. He had come through the wall to the access door's left, which had stopped being a wall and had instead become a conquest-shaped gap when he arrived at velocity from the floor below. The door had simply opened in the aftermath of the wall's reconfiguration, drifting on its hinges in the pressure wave of Conquest's arrival. Levy's eyes opened. He turned. Conquest was already across the roof. Later, in the version of this event that Mark reconstructed from what he saw and what Cecil's surveillance captured, the sequence lasted 6 seconds. Mark was a block south when he saw Conquest change direction from the loop engagement and move, not toward another evil mark, toward a building, through a building. The building lost a section of its lower structure to Conquest's transit and settled into itself with a groan that Mark felt through the air as much as heard. He followed. He was not fast enough. He arrived at the roof in time to see the end of it, which meant he arrived in time to see everything that mattered. Levy was at the south edge of the roof, 6 feet from the drop. He had his arms raised. His hands were open. The portal device was active. Mark could see the dimensional shimmer beginning to form in the air in front of him, the specific visual distortion of a dimensional rift beginning to open, the air bending around the mathematical intrusion. The rift was half-formed. Conquest's hands were already on Levy. He did not punch him, he did not hit him. He grabbed him, one massive hand on each of Levi's legs, above the knee, and he pulled. Mark had seen a lot of violence in 6 hours. He had been part of a lot of violence in 6 hours. He had calibrated himself by necessity to register damage and keep moving, to process casualties as information rather than horror, because horror was a response he couldn't afford, and information was a tool he needed. This was different from what he had been calibrating to. This was different because Levi had no Viltrumite genetics. Levi had no durability, no healing factor, no biology that had been engineered over millennia to absorb and continue. Levi was a human being, a modified, damaged, brilliant, terrible human being. But a human being, and when Conquest pulled, what happened to a human being was what happens to any object when sufficient force is applied to two of its parts in opposite directions. Mark looked away. He looked away and he heard it, and then the sound stopped, and the roof was quiet. When he looked back, Conquest was standing at the south edge of the roof. He was looking at his hands, the same brief survey he had done after the first evil mark, checking his tools, noting their condition. What remained of Levi was behind him. Conquest looked at the spot where the portal had been forming. The portal was gone. The dimensional shimmer had collapsed the moment Levi's concentration ceased, which was the moment Conquest arrived, which meant the portal had been open for less than a second before it closed. It had not been open long enough to be useful. Dimensional transit, Conquest said. He was looking at the space where the shimmer had been, with the mild professional interest he brought to novel tactical elements. He was going to close the battlefield. He was going to open an exit, Mark said. His voice came out flat. He was working to keep it that way. For them, for the alternates. Yes. Conquest turned. He looked at Mark. And now he won't. Cecil's voice in Mark's ear was very controlled. We confirm the portal network is inactive. All dimensional signatures are showing as isolated. No connection to the transit network. Whatever Levi was maintaining, it's gone. He's dead, Mark said. A pause. We confirm. I'm sorry, Mark. Mark was still on the roof. Conquest had left. He had assessed the tactical situation, made some internal determination, and gone back to the engagement zones with the purposefulness of someone returning to interrupted work. Mark had not followed immediately. He was looking at what was on the roof. Cecil, he said. Here. He was going to open an escape route. For them, that was what Conquest stopped. He kept looking. So now they're trapped. Yes. All of them. Whichever ones are still alive. They're stuck here. He turned away from the roof's edge. And Conquest is still here. Also, yes. So we have, on this battlefield, the surviving alternates, Conquest, and me, with no exit for any of us except Conquest. He moved toward the edge of the roof, toward the air. Cecil, I'm trying to think of how this gets better, and I can't find the angle. Cecil was quiet for 3 seconds. The alternates are trapped. That means they can't be reinforced, can't be resupplied, can't receive new orders from a dead man. Their operational capacity only decreases from here. They also have nothing to lose. There's that. Mark went back to the air. Below him, the city continued. The fires continued. The amber light continued. On a rooftop 6 blocks from the loop, what had been Angstrom Levy's plan was cooling in the November air, and somewhere in the middle distance, one of the evil marks who did not yet know he was permanently stranded, was still fighting a military response that would eventually stop being a military response and start being something else. Mark found the warlord in the air over the north side. They looked at each other across 40 feet of urban airspace. The warlord had the beacon in his hand still. He had taken it back out, was looking at it. Mark could see the expression on his face clearly enough at this distance. It was the expression of a man completing an accounting exercise and not being pleased with the total. The warlord looked up from the beacon. He looked at Mark. He did not say anything. Mark did not say anything either. They both understood what had just changed. They were not allies. That was not what this moment was. But they were two people on a sealed battlefield who had just received the same piece of information and were separately beginning to think about what it meant for what came next. From the south came the sound of Conquest finding another engagement. The warlord pocketed the beacon. His jaw was set. He looked at the sound from the south, and then he looked back at Mark. God, the warlord said quietly, to no one, to the city, to whatever version of a prayer a man like him still had access to. He turned and flew east. Mark watched him go. Conquest moved south through the industrial district like a man with a list. He had made an assessment of the remaining evil marks, their positions, their condition, their individual combat profiles as he had observed them across the past hour. He had sorted them by utility. The most capable variants had given him something worth his attention when they coordinated. He would come to those in time. What he was doing now was clearing the board of the ones that would not give him anything. 5 of the weaker variants had been operating together in the industrial blocks south of the loop for the past 3 hours. Not coordinated, proximate. They had found that the industrial district's supply of heavy machinery provided a particular kind of entertainment unavailable in the business center, and they had been conducting what could only be described as a sustained materials investigation. Cranes, freight containers, steel coils the size of small houses. The district had been systematically disassembled. They were still there when Conquest arrived. He came in low, following the line of a rail yard, and landed at the south end of the industrial block, where the 5 figures were spread across a 400-foot span of destroyed infrastructure. His landing was not designed to announce itself. It did anyway. The ground's response to his arrival at speed was never subtle. The 5 looked up. He looked at them. He took a specific inventory. Size, build, the posture of each, the way they were distributing their weight, the tells that a lifetime of reading opponents had made automatic. He was noting which of the 5 was fastest, which was most technically capable, which was carrying damage from earlier engagements, which were going to make interesting decisions under pressure. 5 of you, he said. His voice carried easily across the distance. You've decided that's enough. Let me show you what 5 gets you. The fastest one moved first. This was not surprising. The fastest ones always move first, because speed was the advantage they had internalized above all others, because speed had solved problems for them across however long they had been operating with it, because speed was the tool that felt most like a sure thing. This variant had a timeline that had given him the fastest reflexes Mark had seen on any of the evil marks. Mark had clocked him briefly earlier in the day and found him difficult to track. He covered the 400 feet in under a second. Conquest did not move until he was 8 feet out. Then Conquest stepped to the right and extended his left arm. The cybernetic arm, the one with no nerve endings that could be exploited, the one with no involuntary response to impact, at an angle perpendicular to the fastest Mark's approach vector. The fastest Mark's face met the cybernetic forearm at the full velocity of his own charge. The forearm did not move. The cybernetic arm was attached to a body with Conquest's mass and Conquest's bracing technique. The meeting of the fastest Mark's face and the immovable forearm was instantaneous and total. He hit the pavement without a detectable transition between running and lying down. The fastest Mark was alive. His durability was sufficient to survive what would have killed a normal human 17 times over, but his skull was conducting a physiological inquiry that would take some time to resolve. 1. Conquest stepped over him and continued toward the other 4. The second and third came together. They had watched what happened to the first and arrived at the correct conclusion that sequential individual engagements were not producing useful results. They came from his left and right simultaneously, both going for his arms. The same coordination logic that the loop group had employed. Deny his reach, get him into a grapple, use combined mass. Conquest let the one on his right get his hands on his arm. He waited 1 full second, an eternity in Viltrumite speed combat, for the grip to establish itself. For the evil Mark to feel the grip take, feel the resistance begin, feel the specific confidence of having made contact with something and being connected to it. Then he used that connection. He drove his right arm across his body, using the evil Mark on his right as a counterweight, swinging the gripping figure into the one coming from his left, at maximum rotational speed. The collision of 2 Viltrumite hybrid bodies at that velocity was a structural event. They did not bounce apart. They went into the ground together, the concrete of the rail yard floor cratering around the point of impact, and stayed there. One of them was not moving. The other was trying to. His legs were not cooperating. His legs had received information from the impact and were processing it on a timeline he could not accelerate. Conquest stepped on him as he passed. 1 step, the specific placement of it was deliberate. Not his head, not his torso, but the back of his knee on the leg he was using to try to lever himself upright. The knee's structural opinion of this changed. 2, 3. The 4th variant had been the most cautious of the group all morning. Mark had noticed this from his brief observations earlier. This evil Mark consistently positioned himself at the periphery of engagements. Moved when there was a clear advantage available, rather than when aggression invited him, had survived the day with less cumulative damage than most of the others because he treated his own endurance as a resource, rather than a given. He used this caution now. He did not engage. He put 30 feet between himself and the ongoing situation, and he watched and he kept moving laterally, keeping the distance consistent, watching for an opening that would let him contribute something useful. Conquest finished the fifth one, while keeping his eyes on the cautious one. The fifth had committed to a ground-level charge, aimed at Conquest's legs, a takedown attempt, trying to get beneath his guard, trying to use the differential in their heights against him. Conquest caught him by the back of his collar mid-charge, arrested his momentum completely, and drove him straight down into the concrete headfirst. The concrete expressed its opinion. The fifth variant expressed his. Then Conquest turned his full attention to the cautious one. He didn't move immediately. He stood. He watched the cautious Mark continue his lateral movement, maintaining the 30-foot gap, still looking for the opening that was not materializing. He waited 4 seconds. This was the thing that Mark, watching from a building's edge half a block away, found most disturbing about the sequence. Not the kills themselves, though those were disturbing in their own right, in their specificity, and their economy. The wait was what got under his skin. The 4 seconds of absolute stillness while the cautious Mark moved and Conquest simply watched him move, waiting for the moment when the cautious Mark's logic reached its inevitable conclusion. The cautious Mark reached the conclusion. There was no opening. There had never been an opening. The opening-finding strategy was premised on an opponent who had gaps, who had moments of commitment that created corresponding moments of vulnerability, who could be read and timed and exploited. Conquest's 4 seconds of stillness contained no commitments. There was nothing to exploit. The cautious Mark chose to run. It was the tactically correct decision given the available information. 3 of his group were down, and 1 was dead, and the opening-finding strategy had failed. Running preserved him for future engagement when conditions changed. Conquest watched him begin to run. Then Conquest moved. He covered the 3 blocks between them without appearing to rush. This was the part that was hardest to explain when Mark tried to process it later. It was not that Conquest looked slow. It was that he looked like a man walking quickly through a space where the physics had been renegotiated, where the relationship between effort and distance was different from how it usually worked. He was moving faster than the cautious Mark was moving, and it looked like less work. He caught him 3 blocks east, in a stretch of empty road between 2 warehouses. He came down from above. The cautious Mark had gone briefly airborne to clear a structure, and Conquest came down on his back from the top of the warehouse he had just cleared. The landing drove both of them into the road. Conquest maintained position throughout the impact. The cautious Mark did not. 1 step. Conquest stepped off him, stood, straightened his armor. 4. He was done counting aloud. He was keeping the count internally, the way professionals keep running tallies, present in the background, available when needed, not requiring attention. Mark was on the roof of the warehouse when Conquest finished. He had been tracking the sequence the entire time, unable to intervene fast enough in any individual moment to make a difference. Watching with the part of his brain that was purely analytical, the part that his father's training had built before the training became something else. He had not tried to intervene. He had told himself this was because intervention would have been ineffective, which was true. He had told himself that Conquest was eliminating threats that would otherwise have continued hurting civilians, which was also true. Both of those things were true, and neither of them was the complete reason. The complete reason included the part where he had watched Conquest move through 5 opponents, without a wasted motion, without anything that looked like effort, and had understood at some cellular level what it meant to have done this, only this, across a span of time that dwarfed recorded history. And he had understood that understanding it was not the same as being able to do anything about it. Conquest looked up at him on the roof. 11, Conquest said. He said it conversationally, the way you give someone a progress update when you are completing a shared project that they have been observing. The rest of you are next. Come find me, or don't. He dusted concrete powder off his cybernetic arm with the back of his right hand. Either way, he said, he flew back north. Mark stayed on the roof. He stayed on the roof for 30 seconds, which was longer than he could afford. And he looked at the industrial district, the destroyed machinery, the displaced freight containers, the 5 variants in varying states of incapacitation. And he did the accounting the same way the warlord had done it earlier, the way his mother was still doing it 2 blocks from the loop. He came up with 5 remaining evil marks, including the warlord. He came up with 1 conquest. He came up with 1 himself, 1 arm that was not working correctly, a city that still needed protecting, and a math problem that had no clean solution. He went back to the air. The cautious Mark was still breathing on the road below him. He was not going to be a problem for a while. The other 4 were similarly situated, damaged, not dead, not immediately relevant. From the north came the sound of Conquest finding the next thing. Mark flew toward it, not to stop it, not yet, to keep watching. Because watching was all he had until he could figure out what came after watching. And figuring out what came after watching required information. And information required proximity. And proximity to Conquest was the most expensive thing he could purchase right now. He bought it anyway. Mark found the warlord on a rooftop. Not hiding. There was no hiding from Conquest that had been established. And the warlord was not a person who hid. He was sitting on the edge of the building with his legs over the side, looking at the city. He looked from a distance like someone who had come up to get some air. Up close, he looked like someone running calculations that kept returning the same answer and kept hoping the next iteration would be different. He heard Mark land behind him. He did not turn around. "I know what you want," the warlord said. Mark stayed back. He did not come to the edge. He stood in the center of the roof, with 7 feet between them, and looked at the back of the warlord's head. The same dark hair, the same set of the shoulders, and tried to find the right entry point into a conversation that had no right entry point. "Then we can skip the part where I explain it," Mark said. "We can skip that part." The warlord was quiet for a moment. He looked at the skyline. 5 of us left. 11 down. The old man is moving faster now. He was playing with the early ones. He's not playing anymore. He turned his head slightly, not enough to make eye contact, but enough to indicate he was addressing Mark rather than the city. "You want us to help you fight him." "I want us to fight him together." Same thing. Not exactly. Mark came forward 2 steps. Stopped. "If we fight him individually, we die individually. That's been the pattern all morning. He isolates, he eliminates, he moves to the next one. What he hasn't had to deal with is coordinated opposition that he can't isolate." The warlord turned all the way around. He put his back to the city and looked at Mark directly. The face was his face. The same face, the face Mark saw in mirrors and in Eve's eyes and in every photograph anyone had taken of him in the past year. But the years had done different things to it. The way the eyes sat differently in their sockets. The way the jaw carried a history of decisions that had not been made by a 17-year-old who still had the option of being surprised by things. "You're asking me to fight alongside you," the warlord said. "You understand what that means. What you are to me, I know what I am to you. The original. The one that got to stay. The one that got the life. Not bitterness. Something flatter than bitterness. Bitterness implied an emotional investment in the unfairness of things. This was beyond that. I've been trying to destroy your world since I got here. I know that too. And you're standing on my roof asking for cooperation." "Yes." The warlord looked at him. He was doing the thing Mark had been doing all morning, reading the situation for alternatives, for angles, for the version of this that did not require this. "What do you offer?" "Today, I don't come after you. Any of you. Not today." Mark held the warlord's gaze. "We stop Conquest, you're not my problem for the rest of today. After that, we deal with after. Right now there might not be an after." The warlord was quiet for a long moment. He looked back at the city. "Your portal man is dead. The extraction network is gone. We're not getting home." "I know. So what does today get me? Not dying in the next hour. Then tomorrow I'm still stranded on your planet, with no exit, and you coming after me." "Today you're alive," Mark said. "Tomorrow you're alive. I don't know what comes after that. Neither do you. But none of it happens if Conquest finishes the board." He stopped. "He doesn't distinguish between us. You've seen that. To him we're all the same failure. Half-breeds wasting Viltrumite potential. He'll kill you the same way he kills me." The warlord stood up from the edge. He was taller than Mark. This timeline had given him another inch or 2 somehow. Or the years had. Or it was just how he carried himself. He stood and looked at Mark with the expression of a man completing an arithmetic problem he has been avoiding. "The arm," the warlord said. "What about it? The cybernetic arm. It's a structural point. The connection joint is the weakness. If we damage it severely enough, his left side goes down. That changes the fight. He was already past the decision, Mark realized. He had been past the decision before Mark landed on this roof. He had been waiting to see if Mark was actually going to come ask, or if he was going to try to handle it another way. 4 of us can manage the sustained assault. The other one runs interference, keeps him from isolating any of the group. 4, Mark said. You said 5 of you left. 2 of them won't do it. The warlord said it without visible emotion. Their reasons are their own. I won't ask again. Mark absorbed this. 4 then. And you. And me. Mark looked at the city, at the smoke, at the particular quality of late morning light filtered through 6 hours of ongoing disaster. You understand I'm not offering anything after today. I'm not going to forget what's been done here. I'm not asking you to forget. The warlord came off the ledge and onto the full surface of the roof. He stood in the center of it with Mark, 6 feet between them, and for a moment it was just 2 versions of the same person on a rooftop in a burning city. I'm asking for today. That's all I want from you. Mark nodded. Once. Eve's voice came through his comm at the worst possible moment, which was consistent with how the day had been organized. Mark, her voice was different from her working voice. The focus was still there, but something underneath it had changed. I heard what you're doing. Cecil told you. Cecil's monitoring everything. Of course he told me. A pause that was not comfortable. Mark, I've seen what they've done today. I've been building shelters around what they've done today for 6 hours. That woman in the loop, the guardian they had against the wall, she's in my field hospital, and she's not going to walk the same way again if she walks at all. They did that. I know. You know. The words came out level, which was harder to hear than anger would have been. And you're asking them to fight beside you? I'm asking them to help me stop something that will kill everyone on this battlefield, including them. He kept his voice down. The warlord was 10 feet away and had the same hearing he did. Eve, I know what I'm doing. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, this looks like the worst idea you've had since you got your powers. And you've had some genuinely bad ideas. You're not wrong. He said it simply without deflection. You're not wrong about any of it. Get everyone further underground, further than they already are. A pause, please. A long silence on the line, then, I'm going to be extremely unhappy with you afterward. I know. The comm went quiet. Cecil's voice replaced hers almost immediately. His voice had the quality it got when he was watching something he had not seen before, and was deciding how to categorize it. He's actually doing it, Cecil said to his room, not specifically to Mark, though his comms were open. He's building a coalition with them. Mark heard this. He did not respond. God help him, Cecil said. Then, specifically into the comm, Mark Conquest is in the West Loop. He's found 2 more. I'm tracking them going down now. How long? At his current rate, maybe 10 minutes before he turns his attention to whoever's left. If the remaining alternates scatter, he picks them off. If they group up without a plan, same result. We have a plan, Mark said. Cecil was quiet for a moment. The arm. It's sound. Tactically sound. Cecil said it like he was reading something he'd written and wasn't sure he agreed with. I want to be clear that I'm not endorsing the broader arrangement. Noted. And Mark. A pause. When this is over, however this ends, we're going to have a conversation about the surviving alternates. All of them. Whatever condition they're in. I know, Cecil. I need you to know that I know you know, and that I'm going to hold you to it. I know that too. Mark looked at the warlord who had not moved. 10 minutes. Tell me when he's done with the West Loop group. He closed the comm. The 2 dissenting evil marks were at street level, 3 blocks west. They had not run. The warlord had been correct that they would not cooperate. But cooperation and running were different things. They were standing in the rubble of what had been a department store, and they had been there for the past 20 minutes, and neither of them had said anything for the past 10. One of them, a variant who had the build of a mark shaped by his Viltrumite heritage above all else, from the earliest stages of his divergence, was looking at the comm beacon that no longer functioned. The other was looking west, toward the sounds of Conquest's current engagement. He'll come to us, the first one said. Eventually. Yes, the other said. The original is building something with the warlord. I heard. And you still won't. The second evil mark looked at the first. I won't fight alongside the original. I don't care what the reason is. He looked back west. That's not a position I'm going to move from. Not for this. The first was quiet. Then, even knowing what's coming, they stood together in the rubble and did not say anything else. The coalition assembled on the rooftop 20 minutes later. The warlord, 2 others, a variant with a scar that ran from his left ear to his chin, product of a timeline that had apparently been more direct about its violence, and a compact, quiet version of Mark that had barely spoken to anyone all day, and whose stillness communicated not peace, but the specific quality of something that had learned to be very controlled about when it moved. 3 evil marks and 1 prime mark, standing in a loose arrangement that was not a team, and was not pretending to be. Mark looked at each of them. They looked back. The warlord met his eyes steadily. The scarred one looked at a point past Mark's left shoulder. The quiet one looked at his hands. He favors the left arm for sustained grapple work, Mark said. He uses it to lock opponents and then strikes with the right. If we can compromise the connection joint, here, he indicated the point on his own left shoulder where a cybernetic arm would interface. He loses the grapple capability. After that, he's working from one side. That's not enough to finish him, the warlord said. No, it's enough to change the math. Mark looked at the cityscape. Spread wide, he can't isolate what he can't contain. Don't commit fully to any single exchange. Don't let him redirect you into another member of the group. And don't stop. The warlord looked at the other 2. They didn't respond verbally. They didn't need to. From the west, the sounds of the current engagement reached a conclusion. The battlefield went quiet for a moment, in the specific way it had been going quiet all morning. The silence that followed each conquest engagement, the brief pause before the next sequence began. Mark looked at the group. 2 of yours aren't coming, he said. Not a question. No, the warlord said. Their choice. Mark looked west. When we find him, we don't hesitate. The moment we hesitate, he picks the weakest angle and the group breaks. He went to the edge of the roof. Stay in it, he said. Whatever happens, stay in it, he jumped. The others followed, one by one, into the amber air above a city that was still burning. They found him 3 blocks east of the river. He was standing in what had been a rail switching yard, finishing something. One of the remaining alternate marks, a variant Mark had clocked as a mid-tier threat, the kind that could cause significant damage to infrastructure and humans, but had not distinguished himself against anything that could meaningfully fight back, was down in the gravel between 2 derailed freight cars. Conquest was walking away from him with the specific quality of someone who has completed a task and is orienting toward the next one. He heard them coming. Of course he did. He turned. He looked at the group, Mark, the warlord, the scarred one, the quiet one. And he did the same inventory he had done at every engagement, the rapid professional assessment of what he was looking at and what it represented. Then his expression shifted, not alarm. Something more specific than alarm. The recognition of a scenario he had not anticipated, and the particular quality of pleasure that came from encountering the unanticipated when you had spent a very long time seeing most things at least once. 4 of you, he said. That's more effort than this planet deserves. He looked at Mark, then at the warlord, then back to Mark. And the original has found some friends. We're not friends, the warlord said. No, you're not. Conquest cracked his neck. The sound of it was ordinary and loud in the quiet switching yard. You're survivors, which is marginally more interesting. He settled his weight back slightly. Not a defensive posture. There was no defensive posture in his vocabulary, but a readying one. Let's see if you're worth the time. The spread worked initially, the way a plan works when all its variables behave as predicted. The 4 of them had come in from 4 separate angles, and they maintained those angles, not converging, not giving Conquest the opportunity to use one of them as ballistic material against another. The scarred one hit first because his angle had the shortest approach and because his job in the first exchange was purely to establish contact and pull attention, not to accomplish damage. He threw 2 strikes at Conquest's chest and took the counter on his forearm, and did not go down, which was what he had been told to do, and which he did. Conquest turned to deal with the scarred one properly. Mark came in from the right, while Conquest's attention was committed left. He targeted the cybernetic arm's shoulder joint, the connection point, the place where the machined components interfaced with Conquest's organic tissue, the structural seam that a lifetime of battle had somehow not destroyed. He hit it with both hands, driving everything into that single point, and felt the impact travel back up through his wrists and forearms and into his already compromised left shoulder. Conquest felt it. The arm dropped 2 inches before Conquest reasserted its position. 2 inches was a response. 2 inches meant the joint had moved, had registered, had been given information it would retain. The warlord came in from behind and hit the same point. He was stronger than Mark. This timeline had given him something extra in raw output, or more time with it, or both. His strike landed on top of the damage Mark's had started, and this time the arm dropped 4 inches and stayed down for a full second before the mechanisms compensated. Conquest turned. He was fast, still the fastest thing on this battlefield, still operating at a level that made watching him move a problem of visual processing. He caught the warlord's follow-up strike with his right hand and held it. The quiet one hit the joint from the other side. Conquest's arm dropped again. This time a sound came from it. Not mechanical failure, but mechanical strain. Something in the joint that had not made that sound before. Conquest released the warlord and stepped back. 1 step. 2. He was creating space, and creating space was something he did not do. Mark had been watching him for hours, and this was the first time Conquest had voluntarily created distance from a combat, rather than reducing it. Conquest was reassessing. 3 minutes into the engagement, the scarred one took a hit that ended his participation. Conquest had been managing the four-sided pressure for 3 minutes, through a combination of targeting the closest threat at each moment and using his footwork. The movement economy of something that had been doing this since before Mark's species discovered agriculture. To keep from being fully surrounded, he had taken damage. The joint had taken damage. He was not moving his cybernetic arm the same way, but he was moving. He got a clean right-hand strike on the scarred variant during a moment when Mark and the warlord were both slightly out of position, a half-second window where the geometry had created an opening. He hit the scarred one in the temple with everything his right side could generate. The scarred one described a long arc through the air and hit the side of a freight car at speed. The freight car lost structural integrity on the side he hit. He was still breathing when he came down. He was not getting up in this engagement. 3 now. 3 against Conquest, and Conquest's arm was compromised but not dead, and Conquest himself was. Mark ran the assessment as he circled and pressed the attack. Damaged. That was the word. Damaged. There was a cut above Conquest's eye that had come from the warlord's second exchange. There was something going on with his ribs that was producing a visible compensation in how he was breathing. Not labored, not distressed, but different from the even baseline respiration he had been demonstrating all morning. The joint was making the sound it had started making. Damaged was not the same as defeatable, but damaged was something. The warlord overcommitted. Mark saw it happen and could not prevent it. There was a moment when Conquest gave the warlord an opening on the right side, a genuine opening, the joint accessible for a targeted strike that would have done significant additional damage. The warlord took the opening. He committed to it fully. The weight, the velocity, everything in the strike. And the opening was real. The strike was good. It landed. And Conquest's elbow was already moving. He had created the opening. He had waited for the warlord to make the decision that the opening would produce, and when the commitment was irreversible, when the warlord's mass was fully behind the strike and he had nothing held back, Conquest drove his elbow into the warlord's temple. Controlled. Precise. The specific force required to end an opponent's engagement without killing them, because Conquest had wanted to see if the opening gambit would work, and it had worked, and now the lesson was complete. The warlord went down. He hit the gravel of the switching yard and did not move. He was breathing. Mark confirmed this in the fraction of a second he could spare for confirmation. Breathing but not present. Not going to be present for the duration of this engagement. Mark heard something he had not heard in the hours of fighting. Internal. The specific sound of a scenario collapsing to its remaining elements. 2. The Quiet One and himself. Against Conquest. The Quiet One pressed the attack on the joint while Conquest was finishing the warlord's engagement. He got 2 strikes in, both on the joint, both solid, and then Conquest turned and caught him by the collar and drove him into the ground. Not the elbow-to-temple technique, something more direct. The Quiet One went into the gravel, and the gravel gave way and the Quiet One was in it up to his shoulders. He was alive. He was not getting out of that specific configuration without time he did not have. 1. Mark stood in the switching yard. Conquest stood across from him, 12 feet of gravel between them. His cybernetic arm was hanging at a slightly wrong angle. The joint was genuinely compromised now, the cumulative damage from the coalition's targeting having produced a structural deficit that was affecting the arm's range of motion. The cut above his eye had not closed. His breathing was carrying the compensation pattern that spoke to ribs that had opinions. His armor was shredded across the chest. His right hand was steady. Mark was keeping his arms up and his weight forward, and he was looking at Conquest, and he was calculating. He was calculating the same way he had been calculating since Conquest arrived, running the scenarios, looking for the angle, finding the version of this that ended differently. He kept finding the same answer. 16, Conquest said. He was counting aloud again, counting Mark's alliance, not just the alternates. And all of it wasted, not one of you worth remembering. He turned, slowly, and looked at the warlord's motionless form, at the quiet one in the gravel, at the scarred one against the freight car, at the 11 prior alternates distributed across the geography of the city's worst day. This planet has been a disappointment, he said. Not angry, tired in the way that something that cannot be tired gets tired when the work doesn't meet the standard. Your father was supposed to have prepared this place. Instead, I find, he gestured at the general destruction, this, chaos with Viltrumite genetics behind it. Mark did not respond to this. You've been watching me all day, Conquest continued. I know. I've seen you at the edges of every engagement, taking notes. He looked at Mark directly. What have you learned? Enough, Mark said. Enough. Conquest considered this. That's either confidence or desperation. On you, I can't tell which. He looked at his cybernetic arm. He flexed the hand. The range was reduced. Not absent, reduced. He noted this without visible concern. Your group found the joint. That was intelligent. It won't be enough. On its own. Conquest tilted his head. The motion was small, and the implication was large. The specific attentiveness of something that has been operating at a fraction of its capacity and has now detected a signal worth bringing more resources to. You're still standing here, he said. Yes, they're all down. You're still standing here. He looked at Mark with the inventory look, the full assessment, not the quick one. That's not calculation. You've been calculating all day. I've watched it. That's something else. Mark did not answer that. Conquest looked at his hands. Right hand, cybernetic left, and then back at Mark. I don't run, Mark said. I heard you tell Cecil that. Conquest said it without mockery. Factually, I was curious if it was true. He settled his weight. His damaged arm moved to a position that was slightly further back than he would normally carry it, compensating, adjusting, the automatic recalibration of a body with a very long history of adapting to combat damage. Still here. After everything today. He paused. Smaller than I expected, he said again. But still here, he smiled. Come then, he said. Let's finish it. The first exchange lasted 4 seconds and established the problem clearly. Mark came in with the approach the warlord had used. Angled, not straight. Trying to get to the joint rather than the center. Trying to work the existing damage rather than start from scratch. He got a clean hit on the joint in the first second. The arm dropped. He followed with a second strike to Conquest's ribs on the compromised side. Conquest took both hits. He absorbed the joint strike with a slight backward lean that redistributed some of the force, and he took the rib strike without the lean because there was no good lean available, and he knew it, and accepted it. Then his right hand came around in a downward arc that caught Mark across the left shoulder. The already compromised shoulder, the one that had been filing complaints since Logan Square, and the complaint became a declaration. Mark went down to one knee. He was back up in under a second. But he had gone down, and Conquest had noted it, and the note was going into a file that would be used against him. He circled. He kept circling because stopping meant committing, and committing meant Conquest. Could read the angle. He was moving constantly, keeping the geometry dynamic, not giving Conquest a fixed reference point. He had watched Conquest fight all day, and he knew that Conquest's system depended on predictability, on opponents whose momentum could be redirected, whose trajectories could be anticipated, whose commitment could be exploited at the moment of maximum extension. He kept moving, and he kept his strikes short, and he kept pulling back before full commitment, and it was not working, because Conquest had been watching him all day too. The second exchange lasted 6 seconds, and established something worse. Mark found an opening on Conquest's right, a genuine one, not manufactured, created by Conquest's compensation for the arm damage, creating a brief angular gap in his guard. He drove through it. He hit Conquest in the jaw with a right-hand strike that had everything he could generate from his right side behind it. Conquest's head moved, his body moved, he stepped back, and then his right hand found Mark's wrist before Mark could retract, and the grip closed, and Conquest turned, and Mark spent a significant amount of time covering the distance between his current position and the freight car that the scarred evil Mark was already resting against. He hit the freight car on its other side. The freight car was now structurally compromised on both sides. Mark came out of the crater his impact had made, and stood up, and his left arm was informing him, with the clarity of a system that has stopped accepting workarounds, that it was no longer going to participate in this discussion at its previous level of engagement. He could still use it. He was going to use it. But the information coming from it had changed quality. He went back in. The third exchange. The fourth. The fifth. Mark was fighting with human inhibition, and he knew it, and he could not immediately stop knowing it. This was the thing his father had tried to explain to him in the months before the fight in the woods. Not the training, not the technique, but the permission. The specific psychological permission to stop protecting the space around a strike, and just deliver the strike, to stop checking before full commitment, and actually commit, to let the Viltrumite biology do what it was designed to do, without the human nervous system hitting the brakes at the moment of maximum potential. Nolan had not explained it cleanly. He had tried to explain it through training exercises and corrective feedback, and the specific impatience of a teacher who knows what his student has available and cannot understand why they won't use it. Mark had not understood it then. He had understood it partially during the fight with his father, when the circumstances had stripped away some of the brakes by sheer force of necessity. He understood it completely now. He was pulling his punches, not consciously, not with any deliberate decision to hold back, but the check was there, the human check, the deeply ingrained pattern of a being that had grown up in a world where the consequences of removing the check were catastrophic and permanent and irreversible. He was fighting at 80% of available output because the other 20% lived behind a door that said only in emergencies, and some part of him had not yet classified this as the right kind of emergency. Conquest drove an elbow into his chest. Mark flew backward and hit the ground and slid through gravel for 30 feet and stopped. He lay still for a moment. Not unconscious, present. But still, which was different from choosing to be active. And the difference was significant. He lay in the gravel of the switching yard and he listened to the city. The fires, still burning, the amber light still doing its amber light thing through the smoke. From somewhere south, the sound of emergency vehicles that were probably not getting anywhere, but were still trying because the people driving them had not stopped trying yet. And from somewhere much closer, barely audible over the general ambient devastation, a sound that was small and human and persistent. A child crying. Not the family in the parking garage. They were blocks away. Someone else. Someone in the industrial district who had not gotten out when the fighting started. Who was in a building, or under rubble, or in whatever shelter they had found. And who was still crying, because crying was what the situation called for, and nobody had told them it was time to stop. Mark lay in the gravel and heard it. He thought about Eve, exhausted, holding 4 shelter configurations in her concentration simultaneously, maintaining them through a combination of skill and stubbornness and the specific refusal of someone who has decided that the people in her tunnels are going to survive this day. He thought about War Woman, who had fought 2 evil Marks for 2 hours on a broken shoulder because there was no one else to fight them. He thought about the family in the parking garage, the mother counting impacts, the girl who wanted to go home. He thought about his left arm, which was not going to get better today and might not get completely better at all, and which was telling him very clearly that the emergency classification needed updating. He closed his eyes. He was not a Viltrumite who had a human half. He was not a human who had a Viltrumite half. He was both of those things at the same time, completely and simultaneously, and he had been fighting all day as though the second thing was a complication of the first, rather than an addition to it. He opened the door. He got up differently. Not faster, not with more visible power or a shift in posture that announced anything. He got up the way the warlord had walked through the day, with the specific quality of someone who has made a decision and is not spending any resources on reconsidering it. He went back toward Conquest. Conquest watched him come. He had been watching since the slide through the gravel, tracking, giving Mark the time he needed because Conquest was a professional and professionals did not end things prematurely when the thing might still have something to offer. Mark threw a strike at Conquest's center mass. Not a precise strike, not targeted, a probe, designed to draw Conquest's guard. Conquest's right arm came up. Mark's follow-up was already going to the ribs. Not the protected ribs, the compromised ones, the specific cluster that Conquest had been compensating for since the Coalition's second exchange, the ones that had taken cumulative damage from a morning of sustained combat and were expressing their displeasure in how Conquest breathed. Mark drove into that cluster with his right hand, and he did not check. He did not hold 20% in reserve. He delivered what his body could deliver, and he let the results be what they were. Conquest made a sound, not a word, not a grunt of effort, a sound that came from somewhere involuntary, the body responding to input at the upper range of its processing capacity. Mark hit the joint. He came up from below, changing the angle, going for the joint from a direction it had not been hit from. The inferior surface, the underside of the connection point. The angle that the Coalition had been unable to access because they had been hitting from the lateral and superior aspects all day. He felt the strike connect with something that had no more give available, something that had been accumulating damage across an entire morning, and had reached the point where additional input was not being absorbed, but was instead being expressed. The arm seized, not dropped, seized. The mechanical components of the joint locked in a non-functional position, servos attempting to compensate and finding nothing to compensate with. The cybernetic arm went rigid and remained rigid, and Conquest's left side was no longer a limb connected to an arm. It was an arm connected to a limb that was no longer integrated into his motor system. Conquest looked at it. 1 full second. He looked at his locked arm with the expression of someone who has received information they have not received before and is classifying it. Then he looked at Mark. "You," he said. Mark hit his jaw. Not the cybernetic arm, his right fist, carried by the full commitment he had been withholding all morning, with no check, no reserve, no 20% held back. He hit Conquest in the jaw the way Conquest fought everything, completely. Conquest's head moved. His body moved with it. He took 2 steps back, not because he had decided to take steps back, but because physics had informed him that steps back were occurring. He stood. He stabilized. His jaw was a different shape than it had been. He looked at Mark. "There it is," he said, thick through the jaw damage, but audible, not angry. Not, and this was the part that reached into Mark's chest and grabbed something, not angry, something else. The professional recognition that the material had revealed its actual quality. "That's what you had. You've been fighting at half this whole time." He was still processing. Protecting yourself. Protecting them. He looked past Mark, at the warlord down in the gravel, at the quiet one, at the scarred one. "Even while you were fighting me," Eve's voice came through the comm. She had been off comm from most of this engagement. "Mark, quiet, you're different." "Still me," Mark said. He kept his eyes on Conquest. "Just, all of you," Eve said. "Yes." Conquest raised his right hand. His left hung at his side, locked, dead weight. His jaw was compromised, his ribs were compromised, his right hand was steady. "Come then," he said. "All of you." Mark went. Mark walked through the hole in the freight car and back into the switching yard. Not flew, walked. With the left shoulder what it was. Flying meant instability he couldn't manage. Imprecision in the fractions of a second that would matter most. Drift he couldn't fully correct in time to matter. He could fly. Against Conquest. He wasn't going to. He walked across the gravel with the specific deliberateness of someone who has simplified their situation down to its essential elements and is proceeding toward those elements. Conquest was waiting. He was standing where he had been when the exchange ended, had not moved to pursue, had not repositioned. He was standing in the gravel with his dead arm at his side, and his right hand ready, and his jaw carrying its new geometry. And he was watching Mark come toward him, with the quality of attention a craftsman brings to the final stage of difficult work. The sounds of the city continued around them. The fires. The emergency vehicles that were still trying. The amber light was shifting now. The sun had moved, and the light through the smoke was taking on the quality of late morning approaching noon. Golden rather than amber. The kind of light that looked beautiful and meant nothing about the situation. Mark stopped 8 feet out. They looked at each other. "Your arm," Conquest said. His voice was thicker than it had been. The jaw damage was affecting his diction in small ways. "You're not going to fly." "No. That changes the geometry." "I know." Conquest rolled his neck. The right side. The left side produced nothing. The arm was dead, and whatever the neck did on that side was not connected to anything useful. He noted this with the same inventory quality he brought to everything. Then he came forward. He hit Mark in the chest. Mark had his guard up, both arms, the left protesting the position, but present. The guard absorbed some of it, redirected some of it, let the rest become a backward step that Mark controlled and stopped. He countered with a body strike to the ribs, the compromised ones. He drove his right hand into that cluster and felt the impact go somewhere, felt it register in the way Conquest's breathing changed in the half-second after contact. Conquest hit him again. The same chest. He was going back to the same point, the same chest location that had been sending information since the early exchanges, building on the existing damage the way Mark was building on his ribs. Professional. Systematic. Mark's chest was informing him that the information being delivered was significant. He hit the ribs again. They traded like this. The chest, the ribs, the chest, the ribs. 4 exchanges that were not elegant and were not about technique. They were about the specific math of 2 damaged bodies trying to find the place where the other one ran out. Mark's chest was losing the argument faster than Conquest's ribs. He could feel the differential. He did not stop. He drove his forehead into Conquest's nose. The cartilage was already damaged from the warlord's earlier strikes, not broken, stressed, the structural integrity reduced. Mark's forehead found this reduced integrity and expressed an opinion about it. The cartilage did what cartilage does when 2 Viltrumite-class objects discuss it at range. Conquest's vision went white. Mark did not stop. In the second of impaired vision, he drove 3 strikes into the rib cluster with everything his right side had, not holding back, not checking, not reserving. 3 complete strikes, each one building on the previous, each one delivered before Conquest's vision fully cleared. The third one produced a sound from Conquest that was not a word and was not a performance. Conquest's right hand found Mark's arm. Even with impaired vision, the grip was there. The reflexes were older than the impairment and faster than the recovery time. He grabbed Mark's arm at the follow-through of the third strike and reversed the grab and threw him. Mark had been thrown before. He had been thrown by his father, by the evil Marks, by Conquest himself multiple times in the last hour. He knew the geometry of being thrown. He used the freight car on his left as a redirect rather than a destination. Let the throw carry him toward it. Got his feet on its surface, used the surface to change direction, came back on a vector Conquest had not aimed him at. Conquest's right hand was already coming around for the interception. Mark went under it. He got low, drove forward under the interception, and came up inside Conquest's reach with his right arm going for the position behind Conquest's right shoulder. The strangle position, the warlord had briefed him on it. The specific hold targeting pressure to the carotid, the technique that worked on a Viltrumite brain the same way it worked on any brain that needed blood to function. He got his right arm locked across Conquest's throat. Conquest's response was immediate and violent. His right elbow came back, once, twice, driving into Mark's side. His legs drove backward, using his mass advantage to force Mark into the freight car behind them. The freight car did not survive the impact. They went through it together and came out the other side in a shower of metal and the gravel beyond. Mark held on. He held on while Conquest drove his elbow into him for the 3rd time, and the 4th. He held on while Conquest slammed him into the ground, actually went to one knee and bent forward, using gravity and mass to bring Mark's back into the gravel at full force. He held on while something in his own ribs made a decision he had not asked it to make. He held on. Conquest tried to reach back with the dead arm. The arm did not respond. He tried again. The impulse was there, the decades of combat reflex sending the signal, the arm not receiving it. He made an adjustment, tried to use his right hand to grip Mark's arm and break the position. The angle was wrong. Mark had positioned himself for exactly this problem. Conquest stood up. He drove backward into the remnants of the freight car. Mark's back took the impact. He held on. "Not going to stop," Mark said. It came out through the pressure of maintaining the hold, and through the rib information, and through a jaw that had taken damage earlier. Not clearly enough. Conquest drove backward again. The freight car was fully gone now. They hit the ground beyond it. Conquest was on top of him, using his mass, the full weight pressing down. Mark held on. He felt Conquest's movement changing. The drives were less coordinated. The elbow strikes were still coming, but they were coming slower, the recovery time between them extending. The specific quality of Conquest's struggle was shifting, from the controlled, purposeful resistance of a professional managing a problem to something more fundamental, the response of a body that is running its most basic systems and finding the supply unequal to the demand. Mark held on, and his right arm was going to stop working at some point, and he did not know when that point was, and he did not let go. Conquest broke the hold. He found an angle, not one Mark had left him, one he created by partially dislocating his own right shoulder to change the geometry of his arm, by paying a structural price to access a reach he should not have had. The grip on Mark's arm leveraged him off. Mark went sideways. Conquest came to his feet. He was swaying, marginally. The sway was small, and Conquest was fighting it and mostly winning. But it was there. Mark had not seen Conquest sway before today. He stood and looked at Mark getting up, and the quality of the look was different from every look that had preceded it. Mark got up. His right arm had taken enough during the hold that the elbow was not moving correctly. He could still use the arm. He was going to use the arm, but the elbow's opinion of this was noted and disregarded. He went forward again. They hit each other in the center of the switching yard. No technique in it anymore, not from either of them. Just the accumulated commitment of two bodies at the end of their patience for the engagement, delivering everything remaining into the same space at the same moment. Mark took something to the jaw that he felt in the back of his skull. He drove his right hand into the ribs and felt something give that had not given before. Not his hand, Conquest's side. Something in the rib cluster reaching a structural decision. Conquest went to one knee. He did not fall. He went to one knee deliberately, catching himself, controlling the descent. He was looking at the ground for a moment, and then he raised his head and looked at Mark. Mark was standing over him. His right arm was bleeding from somewhere. He did not know where. He had stopped tracking specifically where the information was coming from. His chest was conducting an ongoing inquiry. His left arm was present, but not cooperative. He was upright. Conquest looked at him. The recognition in his face was not the inventory look. It was not the professional assessment. It was something older than assessment. The specific quality of a being who has spent a very long time inside a particular understanding of what strength was and what it meant, and who it belonged to, and who is now looking at evidence that the understanding was incomplete. He was not afraid. He had said he did not feel fear, and it was true, and this was not fear. This was recognition. The specific recognition of encountering something genuine. "You're a real Viltrumite, boy," Conquest said. The jaw damage made it difficult. He said it anyway. Hate that it took a half-breed to remind me what that means. He paused. His breathing was carrying something new. The compensation had changed quality, become more prominent. "Your father?" he said. "I knew of him, knew him by reputation long before his mission here ended as it did. He had the same problem." He looked at Mark. He called it a virtue. I called it a flaw. Another pause. "I'm beginning to think we were both half right." Mark looked at him. He was breathing in a way that required specific management. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I know." He said it quietly. "I know what it means. I know exactly what it means." He drove forward. The remaining exchanges were not described in any report Mark ever filed. Cecil had satellite footage. Mark did not watch it. What he knew was that he kept going, that every time his body presented him with information suggesting that stopping was reasonable, he disregarded the information and continued. That Conquest stopped mounting an offense somewhere in the middle, and was receiving and was not surrendering, because surrendering was not in his vocabulary but was simply spent. Because a very long life of continuous function had been brought to a point by a morning of sustained damage, and a boy who would not stop. Conquest fell. He fell forward, and he did not catch himself, and he was on the gravel of the switching yard, and he was still. Mark stood over him. He did not feel anything that could be simply described. The feelings that were present were multiple and contradictory, and none of them were available for immediate processing. He stood for a moment. Then he sat down. Not a controlled sit, a descent. his body's negotiation with gravity arriving at a compromised position in the gravel next to the largest, most dangerous thing he had ever fought. And he put his hands on his knees, and he breathed. The city continued around him. The fires, the light, the sounds of people who were still trying. He breathed. From somewhere across the switching yard, very quietly, he heard Eve's voice on the comm. She did not say anything. She had opened the channel and was present on the other end of it. And that was enough. And that was what she had known to offer, and he was grateful for it in a way he did not have words for. He breathed. Conquest did not move. The sun had moved. That was the thing Mark noticed first when he finally looked up. The quality of the light had changed. It was past noon now, the amber of the smoke-filtered morning replaced by something harder and more direct. The sun having continued its indifferent transit across a sky that the battle had no authority over. The fires were still burning. The smoke columns were still rising. The city was still there, which was the thing that mattered, which was the thing the whole day had been about. He sat in the gravel of the switching yard for a long time. Not because he couldn't move. He could move. He had confirmed this by increments, the way you confirm structural integrity after a significant event, checking each system in sequence and noting its current state. The left arm was bad. The elbow on the right was bad. The ribs had arrived at a position they were committed to and would need time to renegotiate. His jaw had an opinion. His chest had several. He sat because the sitting was necessary. Not as recovery, as accounting. Some part of him understood that getting up and moving immediately would be a way of avoiding the accounting, and the accounting needed to happen first. 16 alternates. Conquest. Angstrom Levy. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like the last man standing, which is what he was. And the distinction between those two things was something he was going to have to carry for a long time. He got up. Cecil's transport arrived from the south 40 minutes later. It had to navigate through 3 separate debris fields to reach the switching yard, which explained the time. Mark heard it coming long before it arrived, and used the time to check on the warlord, the quiet one, and the scarred variant, each of whom were alive and in varying states of incapacitation. He did not speak to any of them. He confirmed their status and moved back to the center of the yard and waited. The transport was a GDA vehicle, heavy, functional, bearing the marks of a day spent trying to reach places that were not designed to be reachable. Cecil got out first. He had 2 aides with him, and he sent them back into the transport with a gesture that communicated he wanted the next few minutes to himself. He walked to the edge of the switching yard and stopped. He looked at the scene with the systematic attention of a man who had been monitoring 17 screens all day and was now confronting the physical reality that those screens had been representing. The downed evil marks in varying states of finality. Conquest's enormous frame, still in the gravel. The 3 surviving coalition evil marks at the yard's periphery. Mark standing in the center of it all. Cecil walked. He walked the yard the way he walked every scene he needed to understand. Slowly, methodically, not rushing to the conclusion. He looked at each body as he passed. He did not look away from any of them. Whatever he felt, he processed it in the order in which he encountered it, and he kept walking. 18, he said, when he had completed the circuit. He said it quietly, as much to himself as to Mark. 18 bodies, and the city is still standing. He looked at Mark. Only because of you. Mark did not respond to this. Cecil looked at Conquest's body for a long moment. He's confirmed dead. Not recoverable. No. Cecil nodded. He was doing the accounting the same way Mark had done it. The way the warlord had done it. The way everyone on this battlefield had been doing it all morning. Assigning each element its correct value, placing it in the correct column. Arriving at a total. The portal network, Cecil said. Permanently closed. Levy is... I know. We confirmed Levy on the north side an hour ago. Cecil looked at the 3 surviving alternates at the yard's edge. They had not moved. They were watching him and Mark with the specific attention of people waiting to find out what their situation is. These 3 are stranded. The ones Conquest put down, the incapacitated ones across the city. Also stranded, also alive. Mark looked at the 3 watching evil marks. I told the warlord that today they weren't my problem. I need you to honor that. Cecil looked at him. Today. And tomorrow. Tomorrow we have a conversation. All of us. Mark met Cecil's eyes. But you take them into medical care tonight. All of them. Whatever they've done, you give them care tonight. Cecil was quiet for a moment. He was looking at Mark with the expression he used when he was deciding whether the thing he was being asked to do was within the range of things he could do and still be the person he understood himself to be. "All right," he said. "Tonight." His people had found the warlord. 2 of Cecil's medics were working on him at the far end of the yard. The internal bleeding that Mark had registered hours ago had progressed to a level that was visible even from a distance. He was conscious. Mark could see that from here. He was watching the medics work on him, with the specific quality of attention of someone who has filed the situation and is waiting to see how it resolves. Mark walked over. He stood at the edge of the medic's work. The warlord looked up at him. His face was carrying the toll of the morning in ways that were both physical and not physical. "They said the old man is dead," the warlord said. "Yes, you." At the same sun Mark had noticed, the same light. "I'm going to need surgery. Cecil's people are good." On this planet, he said it without inflection, not bitterly, not with resignation. Factually. On this planet, the 2-word summary of his situation, Mark crouched down. He put himself at the warlord's level and looked at him directly. "I told Cecil to give you care tonight. After that, we figure out what comes next. There's nothing to figure out. We're stuck here. I know. With you, I know that too." Mark looked at the warlord's face. His face shaped by different years into a different person. "I don't know what we do with that yet. I'm not going to pretend I do. But you're alive. That's what today bought." The warlord looked at him for a long moment. He was doing the calculation he had been doing all morning. The scenario analysis, the angle finding. Whatever he found at the end of it, he kept it behind his eyes. "You didn't have to come ask," the warlord said. "This morning, you could have tried it without us. I know. You would have lost. I know." The warlord was quiet. Then, the warlord thing, the name. "That's what you've been calling me." "In my head, yes. It's not wrong." He looked back at the sky. "Get out of here, Mark. You look terrible." Mark stood up. He looked at the warlord one more time. This version of himself that had been broken by a different world into a different shape, that had come to destroy his planet and ended up fighting beside him, that was going to need surgery on a world that was not his own. And he turned and walked. Eve was at the south entrance of the switching yard. She had flown in while Cecil's people were deploying across the yard, and she was standing at the entrance with her arms at her sides, and she was not doing anything with her hands, and this told Mark more about her current state than anything else could. Eve always did something with her hands. When she was not actively using her powers, she was preparing to use them, or recovering from using them, or holding the readiness. Empty hands meant empty reserves. She had given everything to the shelters. She had held 4 configurations simultaneously for most of the day. She had done it alone, without asking for help, because there was no help available, and the people in the shelters needed the configurations to hold. She looked at him, he looked at her. She crossed to him and took his right hand, carefully the hand and not the arm, aware of the elbow situation, knowing without being told. She held it. He let her. They stood in the entrance to the switching yard in the hard noon light, and she held his hand and did not say anything for a moment. "You saved them," she said finally. Mark looked at the yard, at the bodies, at the city visible beyond, the fires, the smoke, the structures that were damaged but standing. He looked at all of it. "I saved them," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I know what that means now. I didn't before." She held his hand tighter, not a response. An acknowledgement. From the south exit of the switching yard, 2 of Cecil's people emerged with a family. A woman, 2 children, a boy, a girl. A man who was holding both children's hands and looking at the sky with the expression of someone who has been underground for a long time and is confirming that the sky is still there. They walked north, away from the yard, following the aide who was directing them toward the triage area Cecil had established 3 blocks over. The woman was carrying nothing. The children were tired in the specific boneless way of children who have been frightened for too long and have finally been told they can stop. They passed within 30 feet of Mark without seeing him. The boy was looking at his feet. The girl was looking at the smoke columns. The woman was looking forward, at the direction they were going, at the next thing that needed to happen. Mark watched them go. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like the last man standing, which is what he was. He watched the family until they turned the corner and were gone. He turned away from the yard. He did not feel triumphant. He did not feel relieved. He felt the specific weight of everything the day had cost. The arm, the ribs, the jaw, the accounting, the warlord's face, Levy's roof, the sounds of the family in the parking garage that he had been carrying since the first chapter of this morning. He felt all of it, simultaneously, without the adrenaline that had been managing it during the fighting. He would carry it. That was what came next. Not the carrying being finished, but the carrying continuing. This was what it cost. He had understood it intellectually before today. He understood it completely now. Eve walked beside him. They went north. The city was still there. It was damaged and it was burning in places, and it would take years to rebuild what had been lost in the past 24 hours. The Guardians were depleted. The military had seen things today that would restructure their understanding of what threats the world could produce. Cecil had 17 screens of footage that would take months to fully analyze and years to fully respond to. The surviving alternates were stranded on a planet not their own, which was a problem without a clean solution and would not become one. None of this was resolved. None of this was finished. But the city was there. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like the last man standing. That was exactly what Earth needed him to be. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.